It is my privilege to introduce very briefly to you as a host the introducer of our panel topic today, and that is a distinguished professor of economics at Yale, Gustavus Ranis. That's how he pronounces his name. That wouldn't be exactly the way that name would be pronounced in English, but we'll keep it at that. Professor Ranis is Frank Altschul Professor of International Economics, and he has a long-standing association with Yale Center for Economic Growth. Its purposes of this center, studying and promoting understanding of economic development process within low-income countries. No better person to introduce our topic today. Thank you. Please welcome with me Professor Ranis.
Thank you very much. I was very interested in the topic of your conference, Crumbs from the Table, because I think we all agree that what we need to consider is who sits at the table, not who catches the crumbs from the table. So the people that we're worrying about, the people in the third world in particular, need to sit at the table, not to pick up the crumbs from our table. Now, how does that get done? They're really kind of two tables. They're joined, but they are somewhat different. One is the domestic table, and one is the international or globalization table, both of which can, in fact, provide goodies for everybody, or they can be very unfair to some. Now, talking about the domestic part of this table, to which we hope to invite everyone, it is basically something which economists used to think about in terms of economic growth. How do you get as much growth as possible everywhere around the world? We've come to realize that growth is not enough. We have to worry about how that growth is distributed and to what extent it ameliorates poverty issues. And more recently, even poverty, which is just in income terms, should yield to something more important, which is human development, the kind of basic things that people care about. People don't eat income. They eat the things that income buys, both in terms of goods, but also in terms of justice, in terms of feeling that they are included, in terms of good health, long life, a happy long life, healthy life. That's what we all want. We all want to live a long, happy life. And so do the people around the world. So we've moved from sort of an emphasis on income gradually towards the things that income can buy or fail to buy, depending on who we are. So how do we get there? We still have to have growth, because growth provides the resources to buy those things, to buy happiness, however you want to define it, to buy justice, to buy fairness, to buy long life, to buy lower infant mortality, to buy life expectancy, which is longer, and gradually infant mortality declines, life expectancy increases, literacy increases. All those things which make for the good long life need to be purchased, either by government spending money, or by families spending money, or by NGOs spending money, or by churches spending money, which is part of the NGO world. So the resources have to be there, but they're not an end in themselves. They are a means to an end. But there is a kind of circularity. You need resources to get a better life, and the better life, again, feeds back into more resources. In a narrow economic sense, it's human capital gets stronger, you get more growth. But in a broader sense, healthier, happier people contribute to more growth. So you have kind of a two-way relationship, kind of a circle. And when it comes to generating growth, the thing that you are very interested in, I know, is the microfinance area is very important, because they, in fact, have features which are very important to generating growth on the basis of human capital or human development that is in place. As you know, the example of the Grameen Bank, Bourke in Bangladesh, and which has been spreading now to India, to many other places in the world, the whole idea of microfinance, which provides access to small credit to women in particular. And it's interesting that women, when you talk about how women spend money in a family, women spend money much more wisely than men, I'm sorry to say. And many of you are male here, but it is true when you look at experience around the world in families, especially poor families, the way in which a poor family spends money, if it's dominated by men, it's very different from when women have some role in the family decision making. I won't go into details what men spend money on relative to women spend money on, but you can make your own conclusions. Now, the microcredit activity not only starts with providing loans mainly to women, but also has the feature of a supervised credit, that people watch each other. Instead of going to a bank, which is often incapable of deciding what you should get money for, or to supervise how you're using it well or using it poorly, people, groups of 10 or 12 families watch each other, and supervise each other. So the repayment is very good. The investments are usually very efficient, which means the high repayment record, which is not usually true in many banks in the third world. People have a free choice of what they use the money for, and it has other impacts on the family. The family feel they're part of the system. They're not outside. They have freedom of choice on occupation and freedom of choice on other things. They have freedom of choice to decide how many children to have. Fertility declines occur in areas where there is this microcredit program. Participation rates on the family, especially females, but also males, go up. So you get a kind of a snowball effect from this very, very important feature of microcredit, because official credit, which goes to the big boys, the big girls, is usually distributed in a very unfair way, where the good names, the good families get it, and the others do not. So, in a sense, the way to get growth from a better human capital or human development position is to have growth which is participatory, employment generating, and microcredit finance is a very important tool for employment generation and the participatory dimension that I've been talking about. We need to mobilize everyone, not only because they contribute to income, but because they fulfill their own aspirations by being part of the game, not being ostracized, not being out of the system. Now, when it comes to the other part of the table, the globalization international table, where the rich countries come in, we have, again, a problem, because very often globalization can be very, very helpful for the poor. It sometimes isn't, because the goodies are not distributed equally. They don't sit at the table. You know that now discussions going on in the IMF elsewhere about raising the quotas for the poorer countries who have not been participating as much in the international governance issues as they should be. But we're moving in that direction. Again, the globalization has a number of dimensions: trade, capital movements, labor movements. All of these can be very helpful. Technology can be very helpful if it is the right kind, if it is labor using rather than very fancy, capital intensive, high-tech prematurely. We don't want, of course, developing countries to always do labor intensive things, but they have to walk, they can't jump. Jumping is dangerous and expensive. Walking slowly but gradually, as China is doing now, India is doing now, in the past, Taiwan, Korea, Singapore have done. That's the way to move forward and to sit at the table and get the benefits of what's going on at the table. Foreign aid can help, but foreign aid can help only if it is really owned by the recipient countries. If it is dictated from abroad and goes to the elites, it can be counterproductive. For example, if a country is governed by a small minority, an elitist minority, there's a lot of corruption going on, foreign aid can really make it possible for the country to keep doing what it's doing rather than to force it to change. We talk about conditionality from the donors. But conditionality usually doesn't work if the program of reform isn't fully owned, really owned by the recipient. That they make the decisions of what reforms they feel they can implement to widen the table, the participants at the table. If it comes from abroad, from the World Bank, from the USAID, or from other donors, it won't work. It's been shown not to work. In fact, foreign aid given that way, as I said before, can permit you to keep doing what you're doing because it takes the pressure off. Instead of forcing change, it permits absence of change. So we have to be careful. We should, of course, be always ready to give humanitarian aid if there's a disaster, and the churches are always in the front row when it comes to a human disaster, and they've been very helpful in many ways through NGOs' activity in helping. But I think we also be very careful to make sure that the changes that we want have to come from there, and we can help, but we cannot dictate. So the welfare and the just economy is what we're trying to achieve, justice, dignity, as well as the material things I've been talking about. As an economist, I emphasize the economic side of it, but I know that what people want is much broader than just the gains from economics. Man doesn't live by bread alone. But whatever the crumbs are not just breadcrumbs. Those crumbs are really much broader, and we don't want them to fall from the table. We want people to sit at that table and share in all the things I've been talking about. So I'm very happy to be able to say a few words in opening session, and I'll turn it over to the actual chair of the first session. Thank you.
I'm Ted Roosevelt Malloch, and I'm going to moderate this panel. You've met some of the speakers. They've spoken. Vinay, Gary Moore, Dale is to my immediate right, and Susy Cheston, and of course Collin spoke this morning. I'm not going to take time to introduce them at any great length. You can read their biographies. They're wonderfully experienced. I would be remiss if I didn't say that I haven't been back on this campus for, 4 years. Sure. And I served on the board with Sarah, so it's a particular joy for me to be back at Yale, and I know that her presence is with us. I experienced that. Among the many facts that confront us, we've been talking about over this 2-day period in the contemporary world, underdevelopment is perhaps the most glaring. The one stark reality that is most apparent in the forefront of the millennium is that a third of the world either possesses or controls most of the world's wealth and power. These persons, the majority of citizens in the so-called developed countries and small elites in the developing countries, are well-fed, housed, educated, live relatively long and healthy lives. The majority of persons, by contrast, are subsisting in a pre-industrial era. The economies they know, by and large, are based on either subsistence farming or the export of primary products. The standard of living of the third world, so-called less developed countries, hovers perilously close to the level of subsistence. Except for the small elite, the populations of these countries are afflicted by a myriad of ills in their often shortened lives. Over the last 50 years, however, a number of countries have graduated from the ranks of the less developed to those of the developed, demonstrating that such progress is possible, even for large populations. Listen to some of these numbers as we set up our conversation. They come from the U.S. State Department. Currently, 1.2 billion people without sufficient access to water. 800 million people without enough to eat. 15 million children dying per year from malnutrition. 550 million people who cannot read or write. 220 million people without adequate shelter. So why are the less developed countries so poor? The answers go on at some length, and I won't recite that information. But look at the statistics from another perspective. From 1950 to 2004, the share of the developing countries in the world industrial output rose from 5% to 25%. Developing countries as a group increased their real gross domestic product fivefold, their industrial output tenfold, their gross capital formation 12-fold, their skill formation based on a number of colleges and technical schools 16-fold. And these figures should be considered in the light of rapid population growth. These are compelling figures that give evidence of massive efforts to date made on an account of the less developed countries. About a third of adults in these countries were literate in 1950. Now the proportion has advanced to over 60%. Life expectancies in the LDCs as a group rose from 43 years to 64 years during the same period. Child mortality has declined from 28 per 1,000 children aged 1 to 4 years in 1950 to less than 10 per 1,000 by 2004. Skill formation has grown dramatically, especially, as I've mentioned, in research and skilled manpower. Primary school enrollment increased sharply from 56% in 1960 to 78% in 1978 to over 88% today. Secondary schools showed an even greater increase. Enrollment in universities rose by more than 14% a year to a current level 16 times that of 1950. Here's my point, and maybe a starting point, a macro point for a discussion we'll have with the panel. The cup may be half empty, but it is also literally half full. We should not forget the development successes when assessing real current needs. The cup is still half empty. As the World Bank Development Report said last year, human development offers the prospect that living standards can be improved even faster. This long-term improvement in human beings is the one bright spot that is shared by almost all developing countries. What we want to talk here on this panel about, and each will speak for just a few minutes so that we have many voices, is the whole concept of enterprise development, not just microfinance. We've talked about that, some of the problems that it faces, and some of the experience of this last 50-year period. So if we could start, maybe we just move around the table. Would that be the best suggestion? Well, maybe we could have Gary go first.
I probably should have gone last.
If you'd like, we can make you last.
Well,
the first can also be last.
I arrived last night and late. I missed my flight. I'm sorry I missed last evening's presentation, but there was a wreck. And David arranged to have us picked up at the airport, and the gentleman's car that was to pick us up was busy, and so he picked Sherry and I up in a stretch limousine. And only at Yale can you come to a poverty conference in a stretch limousine. But if you've read my bio, you know that I served on Robert Schuler's board for a while, and that's the only other place I've ever been to a meeting where they picked you up in a stretch limousine. Now, that actually has a point. David said, don't you tell them that, okay? But it has a point. I know you did. Bob's well aware of our opinions on these matters, but at Bob's place, poverty was anybody who showed up in anything less than a Lexus, okay? And I think it's important when we were talking about today is to define poverty. I was the board treasurer of Opportunity International, I hope you know. And by the way, I wasn't going to tell you any of this. Collin, you inspired me this morning to throw away my prepared presentation. He told you that it was a scam about the 2% default rate in microenterprise. I know this is the microenterprise symposium, but as board treasurer, I developed an antenna for BS, and being on Wall Street for 30 years didn't hurt, and I've been in church and money for 25 years now. And frankly, my antenna is probably overly sensitive these days, and I asked not to speak on microenterprise. Let me just tell you this, the reality of microenterprise. If you cannot accept the fact that it is the least efficient delivery of capital in the world today, do not go in don't. If you're a John Bogle fan and believe capital can be delivered for 50 basis points, stay away. Microenterprise is tremendously expensive to raise capital for, deliver, and get the money back, particularly. But I will also tell you that if you want to join the most effective delivery of capital in the world, you can do no better than microenterprise. There are microenterprise organizations around that I know have 50% overhead, and I gladly give them each day because Oxford and Vinay tell me that it will change 2.3 lives, the 50 cents on the dollar that actually gets to the poor. I have no problems with that whatsoever, and I really wish the microenterprise industry would just explain it that way and be honest with the West in it. What is the poor? At OI, we used to have this debate. Susy knows that the Women's Opportunity Fund always wanted to give to what I'd call the least of these. The men always wanted to give it where we'd get it back and be productive, right, Susy? Okay, do not do microenterprise if you want to help the least of these. These people are materially poor, but they're spiritually rich. And you're not the least of these if you're spiritually rich. If you have the entrepreneurial spirit and hope for the future and access to capital, even $200, you are not the least of these. Sherry and I went to Uganda years ago. A little fellow named Michael in an orphanage took her hand, and we got introduced to the least of these. His whole possession in the world was a ragged T-shirt that he tried to give to Sherry as we left. Since then, we have helped the orphans of Uganda. What we are doing now, by the way, was we've tried to keep them in school. It costs $60 a year to keep them in public school system. And when they're out in the 6th grade, they're just old enough, smart enough to get in trouble. So now we are developing an organization that will hook them up with micro-entrepreneurs. And we're building a village right at the base of the country's seminaries so they can watch this and take it into the bush of Uganda. What I'm talking about is integration. If you don't take a holistic approach to microenterprise, you're going to kill yourself. We in the West are schooled in capitalism, and number one, capitalism doesn't work sub-Saharan Africa. They have no capital, wouldn't know what to do with it if they had it, okay? Trying to remember the famous Peruvian economist. Hernando de Soto. Please read Hernando if you think capitalism is going to save the third world. But long story short, you can hook these people up, and with micro-entrepreneurship, do a good job with them. The near poor. In this country, Dan, I was going to talk about Dan. Dan had a passion for helping the poor of our country with micro-entrepreneurship. We discovered that it takes roughly 100-fold the money to do that in the United States effectively as what it does in the developing world. I believe that U.S. micro-entrepreneurship should be done through community development banking. I have been associated with South Shore Bank in Chicago for many years, had a CD there for 20 or 30 years, I don't know. Used to manage a pension fund. Look into the Self-Help Credit Union if you want to help Appalachia. Let me say a special word. A dear friend of mine, Dave Anderson, used to run the Bureau of Indian Affairs. You may have heard of Dave Anderson, a famous Dave's Barbecue, Native American. And long story short, Dave turned me on to the plight of the Native American people. And if you want to go to the third world without leaving the country, just go visit a Native American village. It's amazing. The other thing I'd ask you is the first rule of ethics is do no harm. The Bill Gates Foundation was heavily invested in Philip Morris as they were giving money to help prevent disease around the world. Please think about socially responsible investing. Some of those industries weigh very heavily on the poor. Then do good. You know, my mentor, Sir John Templeton, was written up by The Economist magazine, who literally said he'd done more economic good for the world's poor with his developing markets funds than Mother Teresa had done. John asked me to tell you he doesn't necessarily agree with that, but when it's material good, I think there's a case to be made for that. Finally, I would simply say that we used to battle all the time. We like to do transformational lending at Opportunity International. And I used to argue all the time that the transformation that needed to happen was not with our donors in the third world countries. It was with the people here in the United States. We have a poverty mindset in the United States that unless it is changed and we repent, and repentance is literally a change of mind, we will not solve global poverty, even a piece of it. I have a report that I brought and can be passed out. Everybody knows about the federal debt. I will tell you, I researched it, got it from the Office of Management and Budget. If the United States paid off all of its debts today to foreign people, to foreign lenders, we would have net assets of $101 trillion. Net worth $101 trillion, according to the Bush White House. Your people do not believe that. They believe we have all kinds of issues. Independent sector routinely says the single largest deterrent to charitable giving is economic fear of the future. Please don't let that happen. If you're going to create a spirit of generosity and help us to help the people of the developing world, begin with transformation of the American mind. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm Dale Hanson Bourke, and I come at this from a slightly different perspective. For the first 35 years of my life, I took poverty very personally. I intended to stay as far away from it as I could. And I started a company, I funded a pension plan, I collected assets. I did everything I could to ensure that my family would be away from poverty as much as possible. I practiced, theologically, the way I practiced this was sort of the Presbyterian prosperity gospel, which is something like God helps those who help themselves. It might be the way we would characterize that. But the funny thing about staying away from poverty is that then you get invited to be on boards. And I was asked to be on the board of an organization called World Vision. And when I went on the board, they started talking about things like having a heart for the poor. And I knew I didn't have a heart for the poor. In fact, I wasn't even sure I wanted to know that much about the poor. And so when I was asked to go on my first trip to a developing a poor country, I was really hesitant. I think a lot of people are. And what happened to me when I went to that poor country and really started to see what was happening in the rest of this world was what I would only characterize as a second conversion for me. It was so powerful. If my first conversion was to understand that I was made in the image of God, my second conversion was to suddenly recognize that I had brothers and sisters who were also made in the image of God, and I had never really known about them. In fact, I had intended to exclude them from my life. When I read Miroslav's book, Exclusion and Embrace, I thought of it not as enemies, but I thought of the poor as the people I had talked of as them. I'd always thought of them. But once I had gone and seen the poor and recognized that I actually had a lot in common, when I'd sit and talk to the women, I had so much in common with them that I could no longer exclude them. And that was a really, earth-shaking idea for me. And so if I could not exclude the poor, the question then became, what would it mean to truly embrace them? What does embrace really mean when we're talking about being wealthy and looking at the poor? Well, I came to a few conclusions that I'll just throw out. First was I began to realize that poverty was not simply economic. When I went and began to understand these people and sat with them, I found great wealth of spirit, great wealth that was way beyond anything I had imagined. And I suddenly began to see my own poverty. So I began to really redefine, because I could no longer talk about them and us. I also began to change the way I talked about poverty and recognize that I was poor as well, that I was poor in spirit, that, as we've talked about already, economic wealth leads you to some very poor choices often. The second thing I learned is that I thought we should probably change the way we raise money in this country, and I don't need to go into that because that's not really what we're talking about today. But I think we really make a big mistake in the way we talk about raising money, talking to people about giving money to the poor, not asking enough of them. It's not enough to ask for money. It's really important, I think, to have a transformational experience. And so it became very important to me to start talking about how we raise money in a different way. And perhaps most basically, I began to really try to understand what it meant to respect what the poor wanted, to listen to the poor and let them tell me what they wanted, as opposed to going and telling them what would be good for them. So that has been a growing understanding as I have become involved with a variety of programs. It has led me to believe that microenterprise or microfinance is at least one of the most respectful ways to give to the poor. I give, and I don't tell people how they need to solve their problems. I allow them to choose what they want to do with this money, which to me is at least respectful in the sense that they can choose how they want to receive the money and what they want to do with it. And one of the most gratifying things that I get to do now is I sometimes take women business owners to countries where women have been receiving these microfinance loans. And what's been really wonderful, I was in Uganda a couple of years ago, had women who had started tremendously successful companies. And they sat with these women who were, some of them in their 5th, 6th loan cycle. So they had developed some pretty amazing businesses. And it became very clear that we were very humbled by what had happened. I mean, women who were very successful in this country suddenly sat with women in what would be considered a poor country and realized that the amount of effort that had gone into what these women had built was just incredible. And one of the great moments was when the women then started to ask us questions about our businesses. And they asked how we got started. And many of us talked about things like, well, my husband worked so that I could start my company. I borrowed money from friends, that type of thing. And at some point, the women looked at us and said, oh, we're so sorry that you don't have microfinance loans that you could access in your country. And it was just sort of a beautiful moment of these women feeling so powerful in that situation and recognizing that they were on equal ground with us. And in fact, they felt sorry for us that we had missed the opportunity that they had. And so to me, that is sort of the full circle of, as Miroslav would talk about, the embrace of really becoming equal with people and being able to sit and say to them, I have much to learn from you. And so to me, that, as someone who has been a donor and has sort of moved along this continuum, that has been sort of the profound understanding that I have come to.
Amen. Amen to everything I've heard yesterday and today. This has been a wonderful, wonderful conference. I'm delighted to be here. Chris asked me to speak a little bit from two different perspectives that I have, and one is that I've done this on the ground. I was a loan officer in El Salvador. I spent most of my career and my education supported a career in the arts and in public broadcasting. And as I was sitting up running the business end of a dance company in Boston, after mostly working at WGBH in Boston, I decided that I wanted to take 3 months to go overseas and volunteer to help those who were suffering. And for many of the reasons that Dale has talked about, it became clear to me quickly that this emerging field of microfinance, microenterprise development, was a really effective way to invest my time and my resources. So I ended up in Costa Rica for what was supposed to be 3 months, and then that ended up staying on for a year. And there I met the people at Opportunity International who invited me to go start their new Women's Opportunity Fund in El Salvador. And so I was there in 92 and 93. And I was the field director and executive director, but really I was the loan officer, the messenger boy, the secretary, and everything else in between. And so it was my great privilege to spend those couple of years walking into poor communities and handing someone a $50 loan. And I mean that literally. It was really stupid to carry that cash, but I really did that and then took the cash receipts back, loan payments back from them. Again, we've gotten much more sophisticated since those Wild West days, and we do things much better and more safely now. But at the time, I was literally going in and handing people loans and getting cash back from them. And it was the single most transforming experience of my life. And I have to say that the first thing that happened is I came in and I had been given about a paragraph of what I was supposed to do in terms of the model to follow. And I came in and these women I was working with didn't want to play with me. They didn't want to participate in this program. What we were asking for was a business incubator model that was requiring this commitment for the future, et cetera. And they just, our lives are so unstable. We can't promise we can pay you back. And I said, no, we're taking the risk for you. You don't have to worry. We're taking the risk. And I said, no, we can't commit to something if we know we're not going to be able to pay you back and we're not sure of it. And so I basically threw that page out in the trash, and we started over. And from that time, with these poor women teaching me, we developed something that had been already discovered by other friends in India and the Philippines and Bangladesh, et cetera, which was the concept of bringing poor women together in groups, and then using that time not only to give loans and manage loan repayments, but also for these integrated and holistic approaches, integrating client training and integrating other kinds of support services for the women. One of my clients was Rosa Maria Rivera. She was living in a corrugated metal shack that was about maybe 3 times bigger than this table, with a dirt floor, no plumbing, no electricity. She had lost everything in an earthquake 5 or 6 years before and hadn't been able to get herself back on her feet. She had 4 children she was caring for single-handedly. And what Rosa did was she made paper bags. And these were very simple paper bags. 2 pieces of paper, glue on 3 sides, that's it. Very simple, but that was what the local merchants used in the local market. So I gave Rosa a $100 loan, and she invested in more paper and glue, and she had been making about $2 a day from her paper bag making business, and now she was making $4 a day. And then she kind of started an offshoot business, and she's making $6 a day. And she brought her mother, Soila, into the business, and she started her kids off at school. She moved to another corrugated metal shack that was 3 times as big, strung up electricity for the first time. When I went back to visit her several years later, she was living in a concrete block home with 3 rooms, a roof that wouldn't leak, a window, refrigerator, indoor plumbing. It was really phenomenal to see that. But the thing that most impressed me about Rosa and her story was that one day I was walking up the path to the community for my regular visit, and I saw a group of women coming toward me from the other direction, and I recognized all of them but one, and it was troubling me because she looked familiar, but I couldn't think who she was, and I knew all the women in that community. And finally, when she got close enough to me, I looked at her and I said, "That's Soila, Rosa's mother." And the reason I hadn't recognized her is that the last time I had seen her, Soila had been the stoop-shouldered, toothless woman. And here she was, standing tall, flashing me this brilliant white smile. And Rosa, with the proceeds of her business, had bought her mother dentures. And I loved this because I didn't come in and spend however much money to give Soila dentures. But Rosa invested in a business. She paid back her loan during this time, and then with the proceeds, she was able to give back and take care of her mother. And the ramifications were extraordinary because it helped with nutrition for Soila, it helped her get rid of her debilitating headaches, and it helped her not feel ashamed. And the difference was such that when I left El Salvador, the community held a farewell party for me. And they said a couple things. One was, "We are sending you out. Your home is with us, but we are sending you out as our missionary. And we want you to bring this program to more women in more communities around the world. This is our commission to you." And the other thing that happened was that Soila flung up her arm and declaimed a poem that she had written about how God had blessed her and her community through these trust bank loans. That's what keeps me going when I have those down moments and wonder, can we make a difference? Opportunity International has very dramatic plans. When I was working in my little community in El Salvador, I never dreamed that I would be part of something as big as this. But we just announced at the Clinton Global Initiatives that we are embarking on a plan by 2012 to raise $1 billion in capital to help 100 million of the world's poor by 2016. This is big thinking. As I said, going from my micro experience, my little corner of the world in El Salvador, to this is mind-boggling at times. But I've become a real believer in this vision. And I have to confess, I am now working in Washington on policy, and just the fact that I'm working in Washington may be part of the reason why I see these things as possible. So forgive that kind of big vision. But the way I see it now is that microfinance as we know it didn't even exist 3.5 decades ago. And then in about that period of time, we've gone from 0 people in some of these slightly formal financial systems among the poor to perhaps 50 million around the world, depending on who's counting. But there are estimates that are very rough that perhaps 500 million of the world's poor still don't have access to these services and can benefit from them. I have come to believe, based on what I've seen over my career of 15 years in microfinance and based on the leadership of people like Vinay and Collin around the world, that it is within our reach to bring financial services to those 500 million people. I think we have developed the technology. We're still working on it. We need to do a lot of things, for instance, to bring costs down and make delivery systems more efficient. We've got a lot of challenges ahead of us. We've got more people we haven't figured out how to reach yet, especially in rural and remote areas. We've got our work cut out for us, but essentially what we've learned in that time, we've done the hard part. We've figured out how to mobilize private capital and investment capital, and we need to do more of that. And I really believe that that is now within our reach. And so then the question to me is, can we, in our focus on these big pictures, can we dare to think small enough not to forget these very poor people who can not only benefit from economic growth, but can become the drivers of economic growth? So my challenge to all of us around this room is, let's see what we can do together to finish this job. I want to end with one comment from my daughter when she was 2 years, 11 months old, which is just a couple years ago. Somebody asked her, "So, what does your mother do for work?" And Sadie, again, not quite 3 years old, said, "My mommy gives food to children who are hungry." And I like to think that that's part of what this is all about, that this microfinance activity that has been so powerful enables women like Rosa to care for their mothers and women like Rosa to care for their children, to give them food, to send them to school, and to give them a better life. Thank you.
I'm Collin Timms. I've already spoken a lot today, but I just have a couple of thoughts that crossed my mind, which I thought I'll share with you. Somebody once told me of a micro-enterprise, a very enterprising young chap who created a micro-enterprise at the edge of a cliff. He put up a board and he said, bungee jumping available. For Indians, 10 rupees a jump. $10 a jump. For Americans are very rich, it's $50 a jump. For Pakistanis, free. No strings attached. Micro-enterprise is a bit like bungee jumping, especially if you're a micro-entrepreneur. And it's very important to have that string attached. And preferably the string should be attached to your ankle and not to your neck. microfinance, depending on who gives it to you and where it is applied, can decide where the string is attached. We try, in whatever we do, in whichever organization that we try to alleviate the suffering of the poor. We try to keep a very close contact with the poor, whether it is the microfinance organization through the self-help groups, whether it's the Bridge Foundation, or even the Guardian Bank, which is a street front bank. We try very hard to keep as close a touch, keep the strings as the bond as strong, and as keep the string as short as we can, to participate in the enterprise, to participate sometimes even in the life of the person who we are trying to impact. There are many ways in which these are done. Aside from the financial intervention, there's also the social activity, there is training, there is capacity building. There is also a certain degree of participating in the individual's religious beliefs and religious activity. Vinay is better at those things than I am. I have just one other thought, and that is, the title of this program, Crumbs from the Table. For me, these are not crumbs. These are seeds that we use to plant trees of the future. And frankly, if you threw me a loaf of bread from the table, I wouldn't know what to do with it. I'm so used to the crumbs. I'd probably take the loaf of bread, dry it, convert it into crumbs, and spread it even further afield. So the crumbs, one person's crumbs, is another person's seed. And it is for us to use whatever resources that we have. So I'm not complaining. Just throw us some more crumbs.
Vinay, we heard from you last night. Maybe you have a few more words.
No, I'll now put on my development activist hat and share not from a theological perspective, but much more from actual practice. Just to say very briefly, the work that Bridge Foundation did was essentially entirely microfinance. The work that my wife started, and I worked with her, I was really her junior partner in many ways, and working with her was a community development work in which microfinance was a part. The community development work for 35 years ago, started 35 years ago, trying to address an area in North Bangalore of 10,000 families, many poor families, and addressing where there was no social services of any kind by the government, either educational or very poor health services. So actually trying to provide all these primary school services, adult literacy services, health services, all those are still very necessary and they needed to be provided. But what we began to do was also to add to it these enterprise services as well, micro-enterprise services. And just to give you very simply the results of it, about 10 years ago we began to discover that in terms of really empowering the people to take decisions for themselves, it was microfinance that actually did that. The women in our groups began to be far more responsible in taking far more empowered to take responsibility. So in the last 8 years now, it is those people now who actually decide what, because they're not used just receiving, they're used to making decisions. They're used to making understanding, because they now had access. We've always used the sort of inclusion, exclusion kind of framework to try and understand that. People are excluded. Whether they exclude themselves or people exclude them, the powerful exclude them, nations exclude them, that's a very big debatable question. I don't want to go into that. But here, they are somehow excluded. How do you include them so that they begin to learn and develop capabilities using my compatriot Amartya Sen's language of development as freedom and capability development? How do you include them into capabilities? Now, in that sense, what microfinance did, these 120 groups of about 15 to 20 women each, it was, and in our microfinance group, it was always 100% actually. We did not have, and that was not cooked up at all. It was actually true, it's 100%. And yet these women, what do you do? What has happened is they understood, they were included now into the market. They understood the market. They were included in the financial world of really basically financial services. They understood finances. They understood the meaning of sustainability. To sustain something, you just can't receive it, you've got to sustain it. They understood something about growth, and a variety of things they understood. And they began to, in that sense, they were not excluded from knowledge, they were included in the knowledge world. They were included in capabilities and a variety of other things. And then began to say, okay, now, how do we use that platform that microfinance has produced, this thing that's produced in the lives of these women, to really add other resources. So let me give you just an illustration of one. We discovered one of the most significant needs was medical support. We could not keep on raising money. I mean, I had to write a proposal up every year, raise bundles of money from all kinds of development grant-making organizations, and you can do it for 25, 30 years. It does get tiresome after that. But how many years can you keep on writing proposals? You've got to find new ways, new terms, all the time, spinning it in such a way that you do get the money. So it's a big game. But you do it for the sake of the poor. But the thing is, how do you get away from all that to begin to see what's the difference here? So in that sense, we began to see one of the greatest needs was really, we couldn't do any more medical service. Can we do medical insurance? So we came up with a very simple idea of trying to do, I got very annoyed when I read just about a year ago a World Bank report of some wonderful thing of a medical insurance scheme they're supposed to have done 100 miles away from Bangalore in a rural area. And when I examined the whole thing, it was such a complete con that I realized that it couldn't have worked. The arithmetic was wrong, the finances were wrong, nothing worked at all. So I wrote an extremely nasty response to it and sent it off. But I discovered then if I'm criticizing others, can we do it? Okay, we started doing it, where basically, essentially, an insurance program where we use the government schemes along with these people themselves. They've learned now to pay for services. They no longer are looking for free services. They learn to pay for services. But they can't pay, as it were, the market rates. So you need to get some support from government. Somebody has to pay, so the government will pay something. But you also got to get NGOs, Christian hospitals also provide a service not at exploitative rates, but pay at a certain service. So in a way we put it together and we said focused on something which has just started, which gives diagnostic services, which focuses on primarily women, especially those who are pregnant women. It's 500 insurance. It's a pilot scheme. And also it focuses on really children under the age of 5 years. And each of them it's payment, and it seems to be, to begin with, it seems to be working. It can work. So microfinance can be a platform for a variety of other things because you've built certain skills, certain way in which you deal with poverty, which hasn't been there before. And I think is an important creation of microfinance world, of financial services, which I believe development, engagement with the poor must now exploit for greater benefits, more holistic services, more holistic development, and more transformational development. That's basically it.
Thank you. There are 2 microphones, so if you have any questions, you can make your way to those microphones, and we'll involve you in this discussion for the next 15 minutes or so. And we can have some conversation between the panelists, with you. We can have arguments, we can have statements, we can have conjecture. One of the criticisms sometimes that's made of microfinance is that it's not scalable. That in fact to do what Susy and Opportunity International and others purport can be done will maybe be difficult, if not impossible. I just start out with that question. Is microfinance up to this task, and is it scalable, Collin?
I believe so. Microfinance is scalable. The problem that microfinance has struggled with is the last mile delivery. We can take microfinance in large quantities down up to the say 10-kilometer radius from the village, but it's the last mile that has always created a problem. But we're getting around that. There are some technology innovations. Technology has come to the rescue. Both the cost of technology coming down and the cost of communication coming down has made it possible for transactions to happen with various devices using GSM technology. The only limiting factor there is now legislation, because and Philippines has taken a lead in this. They're I think, the first country that's allowed a technology company to actually do a banking transaction on the mobile phone. We are pushing for something like that to happen in India. What that will do is make it possible to have a complete transaction via the mobile phone, and then the limiting factor will only be mobile coverage. And if that happens, it will, yes, be scalable, and you can reach every part of the globe.
Susy, you signed up for, your board signed up for this great commitment this week. How will you get there?
Well, I think that, excuse me, the issue is that there are different players that need to come in for the resources. I'm working in Washington, working on the public sector end of things, but there's certainly a private sector donation and investment capital end of our work that's really important. I'll just give one example. Our partner, TSKI in Iloilo in the Philippines, which serves the Visayas region, now has 240,000 clients. Just that one partner. We have 9 partners in the Philippines, and so our total client base in the Philippines is larger than that, but this one partner has 240,000 clients. And the initial loan size is $60. So they're really reaching people at a low level of poverty, 86% women, something like that. And they have done so well with the capital that they've had. They've managed it so well. They've become fully financially sustainable, and they're able to grow with debt, with borrowed funds. This is the dream for us all, is once we can reach a level of sustainability, then we can sustain our growth primarily through borrowed funds and not rely on debt, not rely on donations. So I was very excited about this, but I was talking to him, Angel, there's nothing stopping you. And he said, yeah, but I've got these 240,000 clients who next 6 months are going to want $20 more than their current loan, and then $20 more after that. And because of our track record, we've become very successful at bringing in borrowed funds, but we're leveraged, again, because of our track record at 7-to-1. Now, they've managed what they've had very well, and so they've been allowed that level of debt to equity, but obviously he can't be leveraged any more than he is already. So at a certain point, he needs to bring in more equity. So there's a question of the balance of equity and debt and how we can do that. But I think one of the breakthroughs in microfinance is this concept of sustainability. We do have programs in Eastern Europe that are fully sustainable and can completely operate with no additional capital on debt from now on. And so I think that's a lot of the vision, is if we can create those sustainable institutions, then when I talk about this vision happening and us being able to bring it about, I'm thinking of something that's a job we can finish. It's not something where you have to keep Vinay 25 more years of writing proposals and then do it again for 25 more years. That it's something that once we get the mechanisms in place, we can do it.
Tell us your name and give a question or comment.
My name is Bill Tatro, and my question does have to do with thinking small, the dare to think small. I'd like to read a comment from a 6-year-old named Gabrielle Vega, who put her goal for the year on the bulletin board at school. She said, I want to read 500 books about Africa so I can learn more about the poor people, find out how to help them out, and raise money for charity and God. Then we could build houses for them and a church. I hope that's a prophetic voice of children and young people around this country and beyond that see a need and desire to make a difference, to be involved, to have that kind of a direction of their lives to focus on the needs of others. My question is there a place, and what is the place of the small person, the child, the family, the college dormitory, the grade school, in the process of re-educating the American mind from disaster relief to development? And how does the small person beyond the business, and the corporation fit into that picture?
Would you like to address that?
I guess I'm the small
I'm
person here.
assigning
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's an ongoing issue. First of all, I think that the younger generation is far ahead of some of us, putting myself in an older generation. The world really is flat. People really do see the world in a way that was unimaginable to me when I was in college. So I think there's a huge, positive. I think one of the things we have to recognize, though, is that we're really raising expectations, and we have to now have ways that people can get involved. And I think that is a really important thing that especially NGOs and others need to face, because you raise expectations of people. They want to do good. They want to go out and believe that one person can make a difference, and then they have to find a way to plug in. So I think those are, my personal response to that is very much, I think, what was quoted as what Tony said. If you ask, God will show you, and I think that is as simplistic as it sounds. I think there are always ways that individuals could get involved. I have a variety of things I do, including I bring in these bracelets from Uganda and support a couple of microfinance groups where the women supply these bracelets for us, and then we use them as a tool to educate people about HIV, orphans especially. So there are a variety, if you are an entrepreneur in the business world, you can certainly be an entrepreneur in the world of helping the poor, and I think that's the challenge, is to ask each of us to get creative with that.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. My name is Tara Russell. My husband and I are here at graduate school with Yale, and we actually do micro-business work primarily in Southeast Asia, but throughout other parts of the world as well. And we've mostly dealt with micro-businesses, helping NGOs, helping mission organizations start businesses to employ the people they're trying to serve, women and children at risk, primarily involved in prostitution. And the issue that you talked about, Susy, of sustainability is something that we're just beating our head against the wall with, it seems, over and over. It's hard for these organizations to think in terms of something that they're supporting themselves versus depending on aid from other countries, whether it's home churches, whether it's mission organizations, whether it's government agencies. And, Vinny, you talked about writing proposals after proposals. They're still kind of focused on writing proposals after proposal rather than identifying entrepreneurs that are local within their communities. And I'm just curious, we're sort of starting off, we've been doing this for 5 years, 7 years, and we primarily focus on getting corporate involvement within development work internationally, as well as individuals involved in volunteer projects, volunteering their talents, their time, doing graphic design work, web design, skill kind of project needs. And I'm just curious, is that in line with what you've seen growing and changing in India, but also throughout the world of development? What are the needs that you have? You guys have, 100,000 micro businesses you've started, you said, and I'm just curious, is it mostly money? Is it mostly volunteer time? Is it, what are the big needs you see? And also, how do you wrestle with the issue of sustainability versus subsidized businesses?
Everybody likes free money, and that's not unique only to the developing world. So as long as you're giving free money to people, we'll gladly take it, even if they're crumbs. But then when the developing world and when the micro business realizes that at the end of the day they have to compete in the market and they cannot be in cloud cuckoo land with somebody shoring up the bottom line at all times, the natural forces of business take over, and you have a viable business running, or you have a dead business. Now, it's better to have a dead business than a business that depends on outside support all the time. And if you have a viable business, then there's no dearth of funding. Even in the developing world, there's always money available to fund a business. Now, where the need arises and where you can really help is in technology, in skill sets, in seed capital. These are the areas. But an ongoing support of a business, I think, is a criminal waste. It should be the initial seed capital support of the business, and in the ongoing technology and skill set support of the business where you can contribute most.
May I just make a quick response to that?
Quick response, because there are a lot of people in
Yeah, no,
line.
just to say that actually, I think it's very important to see the whole aspect. Everyone is not called to do the business, and I think business is one part of it. I mean, for example, other services will continue to have to be given, and I think those should get on with it. It's really forcing an organization or a missionary or mission organization to try and also be business-like. That's critically difficult. In our Emmanuel Hospital Association, we're able to change that, and I think later on we can give you a model of how it can be done. Do both. Get the doctors, get on with doctoring, medical doctors, and let others really get on with managing the finances and everything else, and really making it viable. To try and get these missionaries to try and be sustainable, that is actually a next to impossible thing. Don't try that.
I'm Jack Wilkerson. I'm Dean of the Callaway Business School at Wake Forest University, and that will come into play in the question in just a moment. A bit of background on the question, though. A few years ago, I was sought out by a student who was the student leader for a group that was going on a service trip to Calcutta. They were going to live in the local YMCA for about 3 weeks and serve in Mother Teresa's homes. And naively, I said yes and went. And as you have suggested, some of you on the panel, these experiences are transformative. One of the things I came back thinking about, and this is the question that is perhaps rhetorical for now, but perhaps we can pursue this over lunch. Is there a role for, my business school is primarily undergrads, is there a role, a field-based role for business students, aspiring businessmen and women, in microfinance? Something that would be short-term and would be transformative for business students.
Very definitely. We continually get people like that. A business student who knows how to write a business plan, has learned something to write a business plan, can come and actually get on with the job and write a business plan. These skills can come in. We use that constantly and continually. He learns, and we've used it in TBF as well to produce manuals, to produce simply administrative manuals, simply management manuals of projects. So they can use better skills at managing resources. So there's a whole way in which this can be done. Absolutely, yes.
I would say in the Templeton Foundation, on whose board I serve, we last year initiated a number of new pools of money on enterprise solutions to poverty, but one of them has to do with business competitions and sort of prizes to students who come up with business plans that are viable. So that's another interesting path to try. We're going this way and then that way. George.
Vinay, last evening you suggested that there are two components of microenterprise. One is capital, and I would suggest perhaps more important is the skill set that you described. And I'm thinking of planning/budgeting. I'm thinking of acting in relationship with other human beings in a managerial role. I'm thinking of marketing and selling. Those are different things. Have any of you on the panel been able to institutionalize that kind of training, which if one suggests that's as important as the capital component? Have you tried to put together programs that institutionalize that and then can be distributed? One would like to bottle it up in the successful situations and distribute it as ubiquitously as Coca-Cola, for example. Has anyone on the panel taken on, are there institutions taken on that role to focus on the educational dimensions, not unlike the business school question?
Collin and Susy, go ahead.
Actually, yes. The thing is, micro-enterprise and microfinance is a moving target, and it's most successful in specific locations. The micro-enterprise that would work in, say, India would be very different from what would work in, say, Philippines. It varies from place to place. And within India itself, there is a variation from location to location, from urban to rural, from geographical location to the other. But having said that, a lot of investment has been made by our organization in developing training methodologies for field staff and also for the self-help groups, and they're taken to elaborate levels, and many creative ways of empowering women and training them. And we now see the need to, like you say, bottle it up into a replicable model and probably distribute this knowledge. As most of the growth has taken place organically over years, and people have added on, and visionaries have come, and executive directors have contributed, this has not been documented and put together in a manual. And there's something that somebody from Yale can come and help us do, to put it in a bottle.
Collin has said much of what I would have said, thank you. But I just want to say that when we first started out in microfinance, microenterprise development, the concept was very much the example of Rosa, one woman getting a very small loan to invest in a micro business. Since then, we've gotten much more sophisticated in our understanding not only of what's needed, but also of what's possible. And this whole field has branched out in a number of directions. And so, for instance, the work that Collin is doing on the value chain and enterprise development, very exciting. That's a whole realm that we weren't really looking at back then. And the variety of ways to support the business, and that would include the training function. So within our group lending model that we call trust banks within Opportunity, but similar to village banks, self-help groups, the Grameen Bank model, et cetera, one thing we are able to do is use those weekly meetings as a vehicle for providing training. So we do business training. We have 433 training modules that we've identified that have been developed around the world and used in our different partners that are used during those weekly group meetings. And there was just a study done actually by Dean Carlin, who is at Yale in the management school, or School of Business. And he showed that in one program in Peru, doing a randomized control, one group of clients who received just standard financial services without training, and another group that received with training, that the group that received the training had 20% higher client retention and better repayment rates. So there's a suggestion that that kind of integration is very helpful. But I just also want to say, to clarify that now when I talk about microfinance and that specific term, what I mean by that term is not the same as microenterprise development. I mean providing financial services of all kinds, all forms of credit, including consumption, education, as well as business credit, insurance, as has been talked about, savings services, et cetera, all forms of financial services that the poor and that for those who are excluded from those financial systems now. And so there's a way that we talk about financial services for poor households, which is now beyond focused solely on the entrepreneur. So I felt that point had perhaps not been made during this conference yet.
I think just to say very quickly that 15 years ago, the Bridge Foundation, when it started, our first director was Wing Commander Paul Roby. He was an Indian Jew from the Air Force, retired, and his passion was to do exactly what you're saying we need to do. And we tried to do it together. But it became very clear that we didn't have the money to do it. We were so busy trying to desperately demonstrate to our opportunity friends that we had 98% return. And all our services, all our energy went into really making it successful. No one was willing to give us money. I mean, it requires investment to actually do it. I think it was very short-sighted. And you're absolutely right. If that can be done, I think the scale up, the kind of building, I mean, we would have actually done much, much better if we had done that. I entirely agree.
Okay, Guy.
I have to comment on education on this side, the donor side. In 2004, I spoke with Rick Warren, who some of you have probably heard of at World Vision, and I outlined a financial plan for him for that, where his CDs, his mutual funds, everything would enable the poor in some form, enrich them, and it went like this. And I just thought it was because Rick didn't understand money, which is my life with pastors, okay? But then 6 months ago, he did an interview with Christianity Today in which he said he had been to 2 Christian colleges, a seminary, and got a doctorate. And it was only a year or 2 ago that he was reading the Bible and discovered God was interested in the poor. That's in Christianity Today. Guys, I want to tell you, I work with seminaries. They use my books in the seminaries, or beginning to. And I'll address the Association of Theological Schools presidents next spring. Your biggest problem in microenterprise today is American pastors who have been trained to build churches instead of the kingdom. We have diverted more capital in this country for the building of buildings that sit useless, while our people in Africa do not have homes and so on. And it is time that someone, a prophetic voice, stood up and said that in America, because we are the enemy, as Pogo used to say.
Because of the time and the need to go to lunch, could we have each of the remaining questions or comments, and then maybe we can sum up?
My name is Chris Freely. I just came home from 7 years as a missionary in Ecuador, my husband and I. We have begun a vocational training school for the children of AIDS victims, AIDS orphans in Nairobi. It will be a home where they are mentored in a Christian way so that they can learn the values of Christians. It will be a vocational training school, and we determined that we had to be an owner, part owner of the business, to make sure that we could maintain that our students would always be able to train in the school, learn a skill, and be able to apprentice there. These are kids who, of course, their education stops at about 14 or 15, and what we're interested in doing is building leaders. What we saw as missionaries in Ecuador for years and years was that teams would come. We might have 2 surgeons on a team. We might have a dean of a business school, an owner of a construction company, and they came and laid block for the week and then left and went home, and the people who were left behind were left with no addition to their skills that could have been imparted. So our idea is that while these kids apprentice and learn in the business, in the afternoon we will have business leaders from Kenya and America come in and mentor them. This is a long-term mentorship, 3 years limited, maybe 5. They will need additional skill building of math, business, accounting, etc., computer use, that kind of thing. We'll have to have teams that are specific skills and to know what the teams we're bringing in will do, and to hit those areas of need. The long-term goal then is to provide capital through our foundation for these kids to learn daily what it is to be an entrepreneur, how to be an entrepreneur, how to be a Christian or ethical entrepreneur that builds your country from the inside. And we figured that the only way you can do that is through a business. Microloans can be a process and part of this. We're hoping that our classes and the people that come to educate will also be used to educate the community, and we'll have evening classes. We think that it needs to be a complete package, and that you can't do one without not doing the other, and that you've really got to hit everywhere. We're looking for support from the outside. Initially, the question of self-funding, being able to fund yourself in the end, has been the issue, especially in mission organizations, since 9/11, when all missionaries and mission organizations lost 50% of their funding. The idea for us is that the foundation is a part owner, receives shares from the business, and then when one of the kids graduates, his business plan is mentored by people from a business school who come in and work with him. He's given the capital to do that through the foundation, with the understanding that he will do the same, or she will do the same with their business, and that their business will give a percentage of the profits of their business to the foundation to continue the work of the foundation, and they will in turn mentor the community through that. It's got to be this bigger connection, but we need some help on some things, and so we are looking to make connections while we're here. But we just have seen that if we do not incorporate the capital world into the mission aspect so that it can be a mutual thing, as you were talking about, the mutual giving back to each other and a participant in capitalism, we've seen it fail and fail and fail and fail and fail again for the years that
Thank you for that example. Maybe you can share with
America.
some people your website or other information. Can we hear from both of you, though, before we have to close?
My question is actually in regards to the impact that these economic changes have had on the more cultural and social fabric. I'm making the assumption actually that as these changes happen, that it sends ripples through the rest of the culture and perhaps disrupts status quo, maybe along gender lines or other issues. So I guess my first question is that assumption correct? And my second question is, what kind of resistance have you met internally from trying to take some changes?
Maybe we could have your question as well.
My name is Shakira Sanchez-Collins, and I'm an undergraduate religious studies major. And my question was, what would be the different things that might have to occur with microfinance on the domestic scale?
Do we have a glimmer of evidence of any societal changes because of what we're doing? And are we monitoring that? I mean, it's all wonderful, I did this and so forth, I did that, but are we impacting societies? Or is that hopefully the long idea of what we're doing?
So we'll go around the table. We've heard a couple of complex questions. We can't answer them at length, except for interactions over lunch, potentially, but maybe 30 seconds from each of our panelists just to sum up.
I think the impact issue is critically important. Some of us are working very much because we come from that kind of research background, so we're constantly looking at it. And to say that, yes, these are the questions that you raised about the kind of difficult... See, often microfinance organizations are sort of a single focus organization. They just do microfinance. They're not really interested in all the other implications, often, many of them. The work that I'm doing is very, community development, which microfinance is a part. So we face exactly what happens to men. The men getting very annoyed. What happens to the ripples and the negative effects of empowering women in particular ways and the problems they face. Yes, there are a number of things and they're being addressed. I'm sorry time is not there to give you the variety of research that is being done. We are actually doing quite a bit of research into this whole area. We need more money for the research, but actually the research is being done. Very empirical, evidence-based stuff to help us to understand so that we can, using that research, to improve our own engagement and so that we are able to actually have far greater impact and much more lasting social change, yes.
Again, bookend comments to help us close our session, Barry.
I go on Mother Teresa's beliefs that she can feed the poor or hire accountants to measure impact. She used to say that God does not call us to success, only faithfulness. And if anyone's ever had an impact on this whole world, it was Mother Teresa.
I spend most of my time working on the HIV/AIDS issue, and I can only say that microfinance does disrupt the social structure, thank goodness, because it gives women the opportunity to make good choices, and that is primarily what's needed in the entire HIV/AIDS problem. So from my point of view, yes, it totally disrupts the social and cultural gender issues, and thank God it does.
Gary, I'm afraid I'm on the opposite side of this one, which is a rare thing for me with you. But I think the issue for me with impact assessment is what Vinay was alluding to, which is that we need to understand better exactly what happens as a result of our program so that we can improve our performance. And so the focus is not so much on proving impact, but on improving what we do and the services we provide for the poor. And I think that's worth an incredible amount. Given the time, I would like to refer you to a paper that I wrote on empowering women through microfinance, which you can find on microfinancegateway.com, or .org, excuse me, microfinancegateway.org, empowering women through microfinance. And It's about a 50-page paper that goes into the various studies, reviews the studies that have been done, particularly related to gender and microfinance. And we do find, for instance, that there have been some examples of domestic violence increasing initially in the early stages of microfinance loans, but that then that impact diminishes, and that the overall effect, for instance, just looking at one area of domestic violence, is that there is a diminishment of domestic violence, either because of personal action and empowerment, or in some cases because of group action. So there is evidence that we see that we are changing norms within at least communities. I think we haven't reached a scale yet to do that at a societal level. And I just, sorry, I just have to mention that Opportunity International has made a really significant commitment to measuring impact, and I could also make you aware of those findings.
I have a typically businessman's take on whether we are having an impact. And my barometer is the amount of criticism we get from some sections of the Indian political establishment. Some think that we are converting people to Christianity, so probably we are having an impact. Some people think that we are enticing poor people into our way of thinking, so probably we are having an impact. Our loan officers get threatened by the goons hired by the village moneylender, so maybe we are having an impact. We are also get very, very popular. Recently, we are very popular with politicians, and I get invited to a lot of political rallies to cut ribbons, so maybe we are having impact. These people have a better barometer of what's going on in the masses, so I think we are.
Let me make this final statement at the Divinity School. All of us, in whatever position we find ourselves, policymakers are here, economists, consumers, employers, employees, are called to be signs of God's kingdom, a kingdom which includes all human concerns. The full manifestation and fulfillment of that kingdom on earth will not be the result, in the end, of our own activities. God alone will fully liberate the whole created order from its present bondage. When the Son of Man comes in all his glory, all nations will be gathered before him in judgment, and the kingdom will be fully prepared. But in our economic lives, which are very connected today, aren't they, we should anticipate the kingdom, even as it is already here. Here and now, we must strive to be kingdom ambassadors. Creation, including this kind of economic activity, I think we had a great witness to that on this panel, is the training ground for that kingdom. Thank you for your comments.